Welcome to Look Ahead Radio with Tom Arms and Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints on the talk station, FM 107, AM 1240. This evening's program, much to my disappointment and that of our guest, or actually our co-host, Tom Arms, has been pre-recorded this evening due to a variety of commitments, meetings, and plans, and plus the fact we're having a little discrepancy here between the U.S. and our brethren, our cousins in the U.K., and having to do with standard daylight time. And we're going to find out about that in just a moment from Tom Arms of Look Ahead Radio. And I'll also just remind you of the website, LookAheadNews.com, LookAheadNews.com, and of course, where you can read his blog, as well as hear some of the comments that we're making this evening. And I'd also like to make mention to you that, of course, on Look Ahead Radio, you can hear that every Friday evening here on the talk station of FM 107, AM 1240. Again, this portion of the program this evening has been pre-recorded, and it's not to give our co-host and foreign editor cover, but at the same time, due to a variety of other commitments. And with that, Thomas, good evening. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Good evening to you, Lockwood.
Let's talk here very quickly about time. You folks in the UK seem to have fallen back a week ahead of us here in the States.
Well, in the spring, I think it's a whole month that we're separated by 6 hours instead of by the normal 5. But it means that I can get up earlier, that the sun is up earlier so that I can go out and milk the cows.
Okay.
And, do the repairs around the farm. That's what it's all about.
Wait a second. They have cows in London?
Oh, well, I mean, this is daylight savings time is only organized for the farms, and London, Britain being a great agrarian country, obviously has to have things geared entirely to the farmers.
Well, I applaud that.
That's called irony.
It is irony. All right, with that irony, tell us a little something about the weather there in London as we speak.
Well, it's getting colder. It's getting darker. It's dark now as we speak. It's pitch black out there, and I can just about make out the other side of the street. The lights are twinkling and everything else. It's definitely it's winter. It's winter here.
Winter. We still are celebrating fall, and interestingly enough, a very warm fall at that. No warmth there in the United Kingdom?
Not today. It's not been a bad day. I mean, when the sun comes out, it's very nice, and it's been quite sunny today.
Huh.
But it's certainly much, much colder. It's in the 50s, mid-50s, I'd say.
Interesting. All right, and very quickly, rain. We've been suffering a drought in spite of the recent hurricane. Large portions of the state of North Carolina are in drought. What's the conditions there?
Well, I can only suggest rum, because I found out in Cuba they have a lot of rum, but not much water. We don't have a drought here, but it's not been particularly wet either.
Okay, and then the next question, of course, this is just 2 days after Halloween. Tell us about Halloween in the United Kingdom. Some frightening things there, I'm sure.
Halloween is taking off here.
Really?
When I first moved here, nobody really knew about Halloween. But I think watching E.T. and various other films, they discovered how much fun it was, and they started coming around. And so we had to go out and buy sweets. Now, I'm a Cub Scout leader as well. And so Halloween fell on the same night as our regular pack meeting. Mm-hmm. So I invited all my Cub Scouts here, because I like to dress up as a sort of Dracula or a hunchback or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so this year I had my Cub Scouts stand in the windows, and as people came to the door, they would shout out, "Help me!
Now,
save me!"
That is not good. That would definitely scare some folks.
Well, you haven't heard my impression, Lockwood. Are you ready?
I'm prepared.
Now, I paint my face a sort of gray-green and splatter blood all over it and put on my trilby hat, and I go, "Hello, little girl. Would you like a sweetie?"
And the answer is?
they run.
That's exactly my thought as well. Tom Arms, scaring the daylights out of folks there in London and, of course, around the world. Also with Look Ahead Radio and LookAheadNews.com. Tom, so many things to talk about, and we'll probably have to continue this after a break, but I want to go to the point of scary events, and I've obviously got to bring up the fear associated with the election. What's happening in the opinion of Europe as to what's happening here in the States?
Well, it's they're very worried that Trump will win. I mean, and some polls show him ahead, some polls show him just behind. It's going to be a very close race. By the way, I looked a little bit further afield this week to Japan, where 70% of the population, according to the latest opinion poll, support Hillary. That just gives you an idea of what people elsewhere in the world are thinking. It's going to be close, isn't it? I mean, you've been watching it, closer than I have. We
have been, but interestingly enough, Tom, I'm not sure at this point, especially in relationship to the discoveries or announcement last weekend associated with the FBI now seeking to, if you will, reopen research and investigations into the issue of emails. This is a growing issue here in the country, and as a matter of fact, a continuing flow of discoveries and comments about the emails. And of course, it's associated with, again, ironically, a sex case. In this case, the circumstances associated with former House member Anthony Weiner, the
underage woman, yes,
the husband of Huma Abedin. Yeah. My question is, does that not change the opinion of Europeans to?
I think when people are more detached geographically, if you like, they will tend to look more at the issues. Mm-hmm. And in this case, they don't like Trump's issues. They don't like his stand on immigration. They don't like his stand on NATO. They don't like his stand on defense spending. They don't like his foreign policy. They don't like his taxes. They don't like his stand on free trade. Now, I'm talking about non-Americans here. Mm-hmm. And I think, those are the things that are most important to them. They don't like him as a person. Now, the issue of, did Hillary leak classified materials? As you know, I write a column every week. Mm-hmm. In fact, the audio version's included in the podcast. If anyone wants to hear it, LookAheadNews.com. But I'm going to start off this week by saying it's not going to be so much a race to the White House as a race to the Senate dock. We've got one alleged sexual predator and one alleged leaker of classified materials.
Now, the issue of the sexual predator, of course, I find interesting insofar as the observations of Europeans, because that's typically a topic that is ignored when it comes to politics as a rule. And also, oddly enough, I've got to remind folks about this. Her husband, that is Hillary's husband, has in fact been accused and has even acknowledged that he had pursued actions that were ungentlemanly, shall we say.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that Bill's above suspicion or whiter than white. And certainly, sex has become more of an issue over here. Even in France, it ended the career of Dominique Strauss-Kahn, who was the head of the IMF and was hoping to run for president. Mm-hmm. His career is completely in tatters once he was exposed as the sexual predator that he is. It's not something that is completely ignored here. Certainly people have affairs, but there's a difference between having affairs and grabbing a woman's breasts on the plane next to you. I mean, that's somehow, I think there's a difference.
And of course, that's an allegation at this point. Alleged. Thank you very much. All right, I'll tell you what, we're going to get back to this issue for a few minutes because I want to bring this up in relationship to a comment you made a few moments ago about Japan's support and interest in the campaign, and also I'm just curious how the polling data is, if you will, for other countries as far as the U.S. election is concerned. Our program this afternoon, of course, with Tom Arms, has been pre-recorded here on Look Ahead Radio, Viewpoints Around the World with Tom Arms.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment.
This is Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com's World Report for the week beginning the 7th of November. LookAheadNews.com broadcasts tomorrow's news today so that you can plan to participate. It's Election Day on Tuesday, November the 8th, with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton neck and neck in the race for the White House. But let's not forget what else is at stake. All of the congressional seats, a third of the Senate seats, and 12 governorships. Thousands of state and local positions are all up for grabs. In addition, 9 states will hold referendums on the legalization of marijuana. While Americans are trooping to the polls, the Turkish and Greek Cypriot leaders will be in day 2 of the latest round of peace talks to resolve the 42-year-old dispute over Cyprus. The day after the election, there will be a meeting of the Trilateral Contact Group on the Ukraine. On Monday, the EU's military committee meets in Brussels to discuss coordination with NATO and anti-immigration naval operations. Also on Monday, 2 of the nephews of Venezuela's First Lady, Chilia Flores, appear in an American court on cocaine smuggling charges. On Friday, beleaguered Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro is due to have Vatican-brokered talks with his parliamentary opponents. Thursday is Armistice Day in America and Remembrance Day in Europe and the Commonwealth. On Armistice Day in Egypt, a demonstration is planned against the government's economic policy. And on Sunday, the country's Supreme Court gives its ruling on government plans to sell 2 islands in the Red Sea to Saudi Arabia. And finally, if you're a fan of Sir Elton John, you may want a peek at his photo collection, which starts a 6-month-long showing at London's Tate Modern next Wednesday. And that was next week's News Today, so that you can plan to participate in the world around you. Stay tuned after this message for LookAheadNews.com's expanded world analysis.
Quick, what do these sounds have in common? These are the sounds of geography. Geography helps us understand connections between people and places. But our kids aren't getting enough of it. Half can't locate Japan or India, and 20% can't even find the Pacific Ocean. So we created MyWonderfulWorld.org to give kids the power of global knowledge. Go to MyWonderfulWorld.org to learn more. It's a wonderful world.
This is Tom Arms with LookAheadNews.com's expanded world analysis for the week beginning the 7th of November. LookAheadNews.com broadcasts tomorrow's news today so that you can plan to participate. It's a close race for the White House, with bookies giving Hillary Clinton a slight edge as I stepped up to the microphone. Will the email scandal that won't go away block her from the Oval Office? Or will Donald Trump's uncanny ability to alienate women and minorities keep him from the door of the White House? The results of one of the most exciting and momentous presidential contests in history will be known in the early hours of Wednesday morning. The outcome of the presidential race will be anxiously awaited by the entire world, but there are also elections to 34 Senate seats, 435 congressional seats, 12 governorships, and thousands of state and local positions ranging from state senator to town dog catcher. In addition, 9 states vote on the legalization of marijuana for recreation and or medicinal use, and Nevada votes on a proposal to tighten gun laws. It's a big day in America. It's also a big day for the residents of the Mediterranean island of Cyprus, which has been divided between Turkish and Greek communities since the Turkish invasion in 1974. The leaders of the 2 communities, Nikos Anastasiadis and Mustafa Akinci, hold talks in Geneva on how to end the 42-year-old feud and govern the island as a federation. Since the Brexit vote, the EU has been moving faster and closer to European integration and an EU military command. On Monday, the European Chiefs of Staff hold talks on the mechanics of collaborating with NATO, and also on the agenda is partnerships with the Balkan states and naval coordination to stop shiploads of immigrants sailing from North Africa and Syria. Also on Monday, Frankie Francisco Flores de Freitas and Efrain Antonio Campos Flores, the two nephews of Venezuela's First Lady, face trial in New York on cocaine smuggling charges. Beleaguered President Nicolas Maduro described their indictment as an attack by the U.S. empire. President Maduro is facing repeated parliamentary demands for his impeachment, with the result that the government business has ground to a halt. On Friday, Vatican negotiators will attempt to broker a deal between the parliament and the presidency. In Egypt next week, the government of Mohammed el-Sisi faces two challenges. On Friday, the Galaba movement plan a mass demonstration against high inflation and cuts in government subsidies. Then on Sunday, the government is appealing against a court decision to annul its proposed and hugely unpopular sale of 2 Red Sea islands to Saudi Arabia. And that was next week's News Today, so that you can plan to participate in the world around you. Stay tuned for Viewpoints Around the World with myself and Lockwood Phillips.
Welcome back to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints on the talk station, FM 107, AM 1240. This portion of the program has been pre-recorded due to a variety of commitments and meetings this evening. Normally, we would have Tom Arms live and would be, of course, entertaining your phone calls. I'm confident they would be generating some, as a matter of fact. And I'm looking forward to our conversation next Wednesday, post-election, which we will definitely have him on live. As a matter of fact, may even have him talking to us during the election eve. We'll chat about that later on, Tom. Tom Arms, of course, of Look Ahead Radio and LookAheadNews.com. LookAheadNews.com. Tom, we were talking a few moments ago about the election in the U.S., and we're going to get into other presidential elections, as a matter of fact, in France. But the topic of Japan, you said at the outset that, as I recall, 70% of the Japanese, those polled in Japan, were in favor of Hillary Clinton. A question for you, around the world, other countries, is there a decided favorite? For example, among the Germans who are paying attention to the program here in the U.S., among the Swiss, among the Italians, the French, and, yes, even the Brits?
I don't have any poll figures for them. I can tell you that the bookies in this country are taking bets 1-2 in favor of Clinton.
Wow.
Okay, now last week I reported a professor here, Professor Vaughan Williams from Nottingham Trent University, who said, if you really want to know who's going to win in the American presidential elections, the bookies have not been wrong for 150 years. Now, mind you, he said that before the news came out about the emails, but these latest figures from the bookies over here are inclusive of those email announcements coming out of the FBI. So they still think she's going to win. And the British turf accountants, as they're called, or the British bookies, are usually pretty good. The Russians, I should say, by the way, they do have figures for Russia, for an opinion poll in Russia, where 75% favor Trump.
Okay. Let me go to something that's very important. We've acknowledged and talked about the experiences of Donald Trump, and you mentioned at the outset the possibility that either candidate is headed to the, as you use the term, the Senate dock, meaning potentially impeachment. Let's talk here, ignoring that. Just set that aside for a moment, Tom. Tom Arms again of Look Ahead Radio. Let's look at the impact that Hillary Clinton might have on the world politique in light of the past month, I'm being generous, let's say the past 3 months of disclosures and criticisms in the campaign. How well received would she be as the president of the United States? And I'm wondering, would she not be perceived as a rather lame and infirm president because of all the disclosures? Your thoughts?
I don't think so. I haven't really given that a lot of thought. But the fact is that Hillary has an awful lot of international experience. I mean, she's been on the scene since the 1990s. With Bill, she was practically the co-president. And so, she's been around for a long time, and she knows a lot of people. And I think that counts for a lot more than a few months of electioneering.
Okay, I think this is an important observation on your part. Let's move on, since we're talking about presidential campaigns, to the presidential race in France. And by the way, I just want to say, obviously, at some point, we're going to bring up the topic, as this is a warning to you, on Brexit, and also the whole issue of the discomfort of the electorate. And I think that'll come out as a result of our next two topics. Let's talk about the presidential elections in France, and then also you've got elections in Germany. But first, France. What's happening there? I mean, we've got elections happening all around the world.
Yeah, next year is going to be a very busy year for elections. There's going to be elections in France, Germany, and Holland. And the French are having presidential elections. Now, as I told Ben last week, this is the first time in France they've had primary elections, similar to the American primary elections. They don't do it by region. They do the entire country at once. And if the candidate doesn't want to, he doesn't have to participate in the primary election. But if the candidate fails to participate in the primary election and win the support of his party, then he doesn't get the party support and financial backing during the regular presidential elections. Now, they've had the elections for the Green Party. The Republican primaries are on the 20th and 27th of November, and they always do these things in two stages. They have to win an outright 51% majority to win support. The socialist primaries are going to be on the 22nd and 29th of January, but the candidates don't have to announce that they're going to be standing until the 1st of December. So all through Christmas period, it's going to be out there campaigning.
Wow.
Which I think is a bit mad.
But wait, let me ask you a question. There's an issue. Is Christmas an important time frame in France?
It's not as big in France as it is in Britain and Germany.
Okay.
Because the French are much keener on New Year's.
Okay, that's a lot of people are not aware of, and then we won't get into the cultural aspect of this, but Christmas is really a German, British, and Swedish, Scandinavian event insofar as that time of year. France, Italy, Spain, different story altogether. Okay. That being said, in France, let's talk about the German elections, because I want to bring this back to the issue. We'll probably have to do this after the break, but what's the future in the German elections as well?
Well, I just wanted to make one more point about the French. It's likely to be a race between the Republican or the Conservative candidate, who's most likely to be Alain Juppé when they actually have the elections in April, and Marine Le Pen. It's likely to be a runoff between the far right and the not so far right.
Okay, I've got that. That causes me,
and that's very important.
That is very important.
If Marine Le Pen wins, all bets are off.
In what regard?
Well, she wants to take France out of the EU.
That's exactly where I wanted to go. So we'll get to Germany in a few moments. Let's stick with France for a few more moments, Tom. And again, Tom Arms of Look Ahead Radio. Let's talk about the issue of Brexit, the EU. And I'm wondering, even the socialists in France, are they not somewhat jaded when it comes to Brexit? The European Union? They are not.
No. It's basically just Marine Le Pen. And because of that, it's probably unlikely that she would win. It's probably highly unlikely she would win. Because as I said, it's probably a runoff between the Republican candidate, who's likely to be Alain Juppé or Juppé, and Marine Le Pen, because the socialists are in total disarray. The President Hollande's standing, his approval rating at the moment is 3%.
And the reason is because of the European Union, and this is Lockwood's observations, and before we go to the break, correct me if I'm wrong, the European Union, the fact that the French populace are pretty much unhappy with that, and also the issue of refugees. Am I correct?
Not so much refugees as terrorism.
Okay.
They haven't taken that many refugees. They've taken about 50,000 or something.
Okay.
But they are really angry with him about terrorism. They're more angry about the state of the economy. There's very high unemployment in France. He has introduced much tougher labor laws to try and create jobs, but it's not doing it. And so he's basically had to swing himself around to the right in order to try and deal with some of the economic problems, and this has lost him support within his own party.
All right, I want to get back to that in relationship to Germany. I want to bring up the issue of the dissatisfaction of the electorate in general with Tom Arms. We're talking about viewpoints around the world. Tom Arms, of course, of LookAhead Radio and LookAheadNews.com.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment.
They say the best things in life are free. So, hey, why are we paying so much for our basic information and entertainment needs? The average cable TV bill has more than doubled in the last 10 years. The price of movie tickets keeps going up. So, exactly what is free today anyway? Well, you're listening to it. Local radio. Support the advertisers that support this radio station. And keep listening. We won't send you a bill. There are still some things you just shouldn't have to pay for.
We now return to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints on the talk station FM 107 AM 1240. Our program this afternoon pre-recorded with Tom Arms. Normally he would be live, and next week I'm confident we will be talking to him twice during the week. He is not aware of this, but we're probably going to be bothering him during the election eve as well. But Tom, we're talking about elections now. We were just chatting a few moments ago about the elections in France. We've got elections coming up in Germany. I want to get back to the feelings of the electorate and the plebiscite. That's a good word for Europeans. But what about in Germany? What's the future there? Because you have, again, a distinct left-right, or extremes, if you will, conservative and socialist conflicts there as well, do you not?
Yes, and I've had a long talk today with Professor Rob Burns. He's the Professor Emeritus in German Studies at Warwick University. We had a nice long chat about Germany. And he basically says that he can't see a scenario at the moment which doesn't result in basically more of the same in Germany, probably the return to power of Angela Merkel. He says that the only thing that could result in a markedly different government is if over the next year a number of EU countries decided to follow the British example and start leaving the EU. And he said that if that happened, the situation would just be up for grabs, much more fluid.
The issue, though, in Germany is less about economic and more about cultural, and again, I use that word, refugees, the new arrivals, is it not? I mean, the German economy is probably the most stable of all the European economies, or am I wrong?
No, you're quite right. And there is an issue of immigration. Mm-hmm. But really the only party which has made that a major issue is the Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD.
Right.
Now, they're presently polling about 12% of the vote. And in Germany, you have a proportional representation system, which means they will get about 12% of the seats in the Bundestag. No other party wants to work with the Alternative for Deutschland. Now, because of the proportional representation system in Germany, usually you have a coalition government. Mm-hmm. So if all the other parties regard the AfD as toxic, then they would form a party which would be opposed to the AfD, or a government which would be opposed to the AfD.
All right.
That is the most likely scenario. At the moment, you have what's called a grand coalition, which includes the SPD, the FDP, the CDU, the CSU. The only ones that are left out of that are the Greens, and also what's called the Left, which is the old Communist Party from East Germany. Alternative for Deutschland wasn't even formed when the last election took place, so they really don't have any place in the current situation.
And they've been very aggressive on the issue of refugees and immigration, and very opposed to Angela Merkel in the process. Yeah. Let's talk here then about the impact of all of these elections. And I would have to hearken all the way back to the United States. It started with Brexit, though, the fact that many on the street are unhappy. That I would argue that that's one of the indications that's here in the States with this election. Are we seeing a shift, Thomas, in the opinions and the motivation of voters? They seem to be more, if you will, nationalistic and more concerned with self-identity, national identity. Are we seeing a shift, or is this a temporary experience, in your opinion?
I don't know if it's a case of national identity so much, although it might become that. And you're right, you might see a shift towards that. But it's more a case of dissatisfaction with the political establishment who over the past 10, 15, 20 years have failed to deliver the necessary economic growth to keep people happy. Real wages right throughout the Western world are dropping, or have dropped, or they're stable, or stagnant would be a better word. You have always been told in America that each generation will be better off than the next generation, right. And at the moment that's not the case. And we've been told ever since the war, and even before that, it's been a long series of decade after decade after decade of each generation is better off than the previous one. There are more opportunities, there is more money to go around, and now it just seems to be stuck.
Is this an issue also of the establishment trying to stay in power? That's been one of the arguments here in the States, and I'm wondering if this isn't probably an international concern now, and of course it falls back onto the initial participation of or part of our conversation this evening about the topic of the U.S. campaigns. We're seeing this, a general, I'll use the word malaise or dissatisfaction worldwide. What happens then when this all becomes fulfilled? Is there a possibility? Is there any kind of, if you will, buffer or negotiation? It doesn't seem like it at this point.
No. I mean, we just have to wait and see. I mean, yes, there is, people are very dissatisfied. There is no buffer as such, other than cooperation. That's been the buffer ever since the end of World War II, is increased cooperation. The Bretton Woods Agreement, the Marshall Plan, the EU, various free trade agreements, NATO, those have all involved cooperation. And what people are talking about is stopping cooperation and looking after number one. And it starts with looking after number one at home, and then you're right. It then extends beyond that, looking after number one as your city or your town or your state, and then looking after number one as your country. And, forget the others, they don't count. But the problem is that we all sit on the same planet. Well, we share this same space in the solar system. And therefore, we have to cooperate. If we don't, then the danger is that we'll fall out.
We'll fall out and we'll have wars. By the way, just as a mention on this, and this has come up several times in the campaign, the U.S. is engaged in, I think it's 5, or maybe the number is 6, conflicts around the world. And this, oddly enough, led by the current administration and president, who, of course, swore to get us out of all these conflicts, who, by the way, I might add, was the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. I find that a little ironic as well. But it is interesting. We are looking at efforts to avoid another world conflagration similar to WW1 and WW2. I'm wondering if maybe in the process we're actually backing into yet another major conflict. We'll get that answer here in just a moment from Tom Arms of Look Ahead Radio and LookAheadNews.com. That's Look Ahead, all one word, LookAheadNews.com. And of course, you're listening to Viewpoints Around the World with Tom Arms and Lockwood Phillips here on the Talk Station.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment.
Observations of an Expat by Tom Arms. Sitting on the eastern side of the Atlantic, the Trump-Clinton battle seems more of a race to the Senate dock than to the door of the White House. Who will win? alleged sexual predator Donald Trump or alleged peddler of classified materials Hillary Clinton. It seems increasingly likely that whichever way the electoral coin lands, the winner will face impeachment proceedings before completing their first 100 days in office. That being the case, well, we should look beyond the personalities to the actual policies which would have to be implemented by the vice presidential candidate, Pence or Kane, one of whom would be catapulted into the Oval Office. So here's a look at the political plans, rather than the personalities, of the Republican and Democratic nominees for the presidency of the United States. And because this is supposed to be an opinion piece, I will express my opinion. I stress that they are the opinions of an American expat, and not the opinions of any station that chooses to broadcast this. 1. Taxes. Trump wants to lower taxes for the wealthy in the belief that they will invest and spend money in the economy. Clinton wants to raise taxes on the wealthy to spend money on infrastructure. Well, most economists plump for Hillary, as Trump's plan would reduce government revenues by $9.5 trillion over the next 15 years, and he's failed to balance that with any significant cost-cutting proposals. 2. Free trade. Trump wants to scrap NAFTA, the Asia-Pacific deal, and end talks for an EU-US trade deal and start a trade war with China. Clinton prevaricates on the deals, but is definitely more free trade-oriented than Trump. This is a toughie. Free trade deals are unpopular because there's a benefit time lag between the export of manufacturing jobs overseas and the creation of new industry jobs. I go for Hillary, but only if more money is invested in retraining. As for China, well, with their massive domestic market, they would win a trade war. 3. Immigration. Trump wants to restrict Muslim immigration, build a wall on the U.S.-Mexican border, and start the process of deporting illegal immigrants back to their homelands. Clinton wants to start the process of granting citizenship to illegal immigrants. No doubt here. If you want a growing economy, you need immigrants. On top of that, I reckon that any religion-based restriction on immigration would fall foul of the First Amendment. The wall and mass deportations would be a major blow to American standing around the world. 4. Obamacare. Trump wants to repeal it. Clinton wants to improve it. I believe that a system that guarantees health care for all its citizens is a mark of a civilized society. 5. The Supreme Court. Trump wants to pack it with conservatives. Clinton wants to pack it with liberals. Trump would mean the end of abortion and continuing lax gun laws. I am ambivalent on abortion. I love children and babies, but can understand support for the woman's right to choose. On gun laws, America's astronomical homicide statistics speak for themselves. Why does the average person need a semi-automatic weapon? 6. ISIS, terrorism, and the Middle East. The two candidates' policies on this are almost as clear as the Byzantine machinations of the region. Careful analysis reveals that there is not that much difference between the two candidates, other than that Trump blames Hillary for the current mess. This carries some weight, but the last few weeks have seen a possible turning of the tide for the West. I don't see the Donald giving Clinton any credit for that. 7. Defense and foreign policy. Trump wants to work with Russia in the Middle East and Eastern Europe and draw back from global defense commitments. Clinton is distrustful of Russian intention and wants to maintain American commitments. Trump's policy is truly frightening. Russia's corporatist dictatorship is the antithesis of American democracy. Offering to work with Putin gives it legitimacy. As for NATO and other alliances, well, these have been the cornerstone of unprecedented global peace for 70 years. Please, please don't throw them out.
Welcome back to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints on the talk station FM 107 AM 1240. This portion of the program today has been pre-recorded to accommodate, well, a time change for our co-host, in this case, Tom Arms of Look Ahead Radio, who's calling from London. And both Ross and I have to be out of the studio today due to some other meetings. But looking forward to the conversation today and next week, Tom. And I've got to ask if you're kind of excited about the events in the U.S. But before we get to that, let's stay with some events around the world. You've sent me an interesting note. That Raoul, I think I'm pronouncing his name properly, Wallenberg, finally has been declared dead although it's been noted he died in arguably sometime between 1947 and 1952, during which time he was, sadly, and I say this in a sense of it's almost a name you seldom hear, he was incarcerated by SMERSH, which is an interesting organization. But let's start with, who is Raoul Wallenberg? And I'm by pronouncing his first name correctly.
Yeah, he's one of those people we should always try to remember as an example of just a great human being.
Right.
And a lot of you listeners may have forgotten about him and may not have been born, but in 1944, July 1944, at the age of 31, he went from Sweden to Budapest to be a Swedish diplomat. And he was given the job of trying to protect the Jews in Hungary. Now, listen very carefully. He saved 100,000 Jewish lives.
Amazing.
Now, he did this by basically handing out Swedish travel documents, which he persuaded the Germans actually bestowed Swedish citizenship on the Jews that he gave them to. He drove through the neighborhoods, working 18 hours a day, knocking on doors, handing out these documents. In one case, or in another case, because they were still having problems, because what the Germans responded by trying to round people up faster and send them off to Auschwitz, he bought or rented 30 homes, declared Swedish property, draped Swedish flags over them, and moved Jewish families into them so that they had diplomatic immunity. In one case, he actually went down to the railway yard where there was a train about to depart, filled with these Jews who were bound for Auschwitz, climbed on top of the railway carriages with the Nazi guards shooting at him, and passed the travel documents through the slats down to these Jews.
Wow.
He then had them show the guards the documents, and they were all set free.
And this is an interesting story, and I'm glad you've brought it up. It's a bit of history that even I was only sketchily aware of. But he was now officially declared dead yesterday, if I understand this correctly?
Yeah, he was arrested by the Russians when they entered Hungary as an American agent. And actually, the CIA later admitted he had been an American agent. And so, although it was certainly wrong what the Russians did, they did have some grounds, if you like, but, absolutely, he should have been released. And the records of exactly what happened to him are not known, but the last known record is that on the 23rd of July, 1947, he was interviewed in the Lubyanka, which was the prison for political prisoners. And so that's the last known record. So the Swedish authorities reckon, well, they have a formula which says that they can declare someone dead, but no more than 5 years or before 5 years after their last known sighting or official record. And so he was declared as being dead on the 23rd of July, 1952. But for tax purposes, they held on another few years. And so now the Swedish tax authorities have finally said they will no longer try to collect taxes from Raoul Wallenberg.
Wow, that's a fascinating story, and I think I commend you on bringing this to the topic this afternoon, Tom. And going again, just to remind.
Well, I think we need heroes.
We do. We definitely,
especially now.
Yes, we definitely do. Tom Arms, of course, of LookAhead Radio. LookAheadRadio.com is the website. And, of course, LookAheadNews.com. And Look Ahead Radio, heard here on Fridays on the talk station and other stations around the world, I might add. All right, Tom, let's move to another topic and back to the issue of, if you will, the discomforts of the world. You've got an interesting note here, the Turkish game plan in Syria and Iraq. That's a fascinating statement. Very provocative, in my opinion, because we're never sure what President Erdogan is up to. He's making noises of friendship with Russia. He at one moment is being supportive of the Syrian regime, and the next moment he's attacking Iraq. That unto itself reminds me of another famous British statement, something to the effect of a puzzle within an enigma or an enigma within a puzzle. I'm not sure which of those phrases goes first.
It was enigma within a puzzle, yeah. It described the Soviet Union.
Yes, Sir Winston Churchill. Yeah. So let's talk about this. What's happening in Turkey?
Well, Erdogan is indeed an enigma in a puzzle. He holds his cards very close to his chest. But we should be really worried, I think.
That's an understatement.
Because we could end up with a war between Iraq and Turkey, both of whom are allies of the U.S., obviously. Mm-hmm. The problem is that Erdogan is trying to use the problems around him to create a sort of nationalistic fervor in order to keep himself in power. At least that's my reading of the situation. Now, he's revived some of the old Ottoman Empire territorial claims. For instance, they've been publishing maps lately, which have been shown on television and newspapers, showing that Mosul, Aleppo are all part of Turkey. Okay?
We won't have time to really belabor this, and I might add, I say belabor it, to get into the details on this one, Tom. But
the Iraqi premier is really worried about it and has been saying so.
It should go to prove that a friendship with, how do you pronounce his name? Erdogan. I want to say Erdogan. Erdogan is something that is really temporary, and I find this interesting, and of course he has continued his purge, shutting down more media and arresting more people, even in the past few weeks. So this is a gentleman, I use that word advisedly, that deserves a great deal of scrutiny and caution. Let's move to another item. We've only got about a minute and a half to go with you, Tom. And of course, Tom Arms of Look Ahead Radio with us this afternoon. And I'll also just to remind you, LookAheadNews.com. This is an interesting story that you've given me. A Spanish municipality is now requiring DNA testing for dogs, or introducing DNA testing for dogs because of, dog deposits, shall we say?
Yes. What they're going to do is they've required that all dogs be tested, that owners bring them in for DNA testing. And then if they actually drop anything on the pavement, the park keepers will collect it, check it against the DNA records, and if it's found that it belongs to someone who's been tested, they will be fined $300. Now, let me just quickly add, because I know we're short of time here, that there's another Spanish city which has done this, but they've done it with a difference. Instead of fining them, they box up the poo and send it back to them.
Well, there is a little seriousness to this note. And it's an unfortunate comment that I close with. I find it interesting the Spanish are able to do this within a relatively short period of time, this particular city and its various bureaucrats, and that they can identify the source of the DNA. We have in North Carolina, Tom, under the current administration's, the State Bureau of Investigations, we have months worth of actually victims awaiting patiently for a response on the DNA testing in the case of rapes and assaults. I find it interesting that we're going to have to see if we can't send these same samples to the Spanish city to see if we can't get a faster response on a comparative analysis. This is amazing, Tom.
It'd be easy if they were dogs.
No. I don't agree with that one. Thank you. Well, in some instances, I think the people that have been arrested would qualify, probably not even as dogs. But that's a personal comment. Tom Arms, of course, of Look Ahead Radio, heard every Friday afternoon here on the talk station and in radio stations around the country, as well as on the website LookAheadNews.com. Tom, thanks for being with us, and I'm going to chat with you briefly off air, but thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
Viewpoints on the talk station, FM 107, AM 1240.
Look Ahead Radio is a production of the talk station.